Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out on this gray, yucky day to what promises to be a very warm and bright and meaningful conversation. We are honored and delighted to introduce our guest speakers, two of the most accomplished leaders in urban design that our nation has to offer, in fact. Working on every architectural scale from the paving brick to the regional landscape, and working at every time scale from the flash of an ephemeral moment on a front porch to the slow evolution of whole cities, they have set the stage for countless lives and they have given shape to whole communities. Because they are committed as people, as well as designers, to recognizing the value and dignity of every human being, their work has traced the front lines of national and global efforts to make our communities healthier, happier, more sustainable on every level, and more democratic. They have valiantly wrested time, space, and public wealth away from the screeching tires of the automobile to lay it again before the hands, feet, and eyes of the people.
So, John Francis Torti, I'm honored to introduce. John's career is a testament to a tenacious effort to center architectural practice and core questions of society, and addressing how the built environment impacts daily life in cities and towns across the country. John and his founding partner, Tom Gallas, together built on a successful legacy of housing design to become leaders in the creation of compact urban form that generates streets, squares, and parks, centering life around the pedestrian rather than the car. They realized that good, dense, walkable urbanism supports and sustains community as well as ecological health and well-being. Their application of new urbanist principles in city centers, combined with a deep knowledge of delivering cost-effective construction and elegant design, makes Torti Gallas Partners an international leader in the development of mixed-use and mixed-income neighborhoods. They are what they advertise, architects of a better world. John's lived experience traces a remarkable arc of American urban history, from his youth in the North Bronx to his witnessing of the tragic abandonment of American cities, and finally to his work on the decades-long project to rebuild them and support their rediscovery of the cities and of the benefits of urban life that had been forgotten by many. He studied architecture at Notre Dame and then planning here at Catholic University while he worked for the National Capital Planning Commission. John is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, served as a national board member of the Congress of the New Urbanism, is a member of the Advisory Council of the School of Architecture at Notre Dame, and a member of our own Board of Visitors. His firm has won numerous, too many to count, design awards. He has blessed this school by his teaching and numerous service on juries, and we are very grateful for that and for his presence tonight. Thank you, John, for being here.
John will speak second, and then after John speaks, we'll all gather for a conversation between our two great speakers. But our first speaker is Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, and many of you will know that our school has been blessed not only by John, very much so, but also by Liz. She spent many months leading our curriculum review committee, which was formed to help us figure out what we do best and how we can continue growing and evolving into full strength and virtue as the School of Architecture at the Catholic University. We asked her to lead this committee for several reasons. She developed a reputation at the Yale University School of Architecture as one of their most beloved and effective teachers. She also successfully led the development of the School of Architecture at the University of Miami into a world-class design program. Before she did all of these wonderful things, Elizabeth studied architecture at Princeton, where she later served as a trustee, and at Yale, which gave her an honorary doctorate in 2023 to match her MArch. Together with her husband and professional partner, the luminous Andres Duani, Elizabeth was a founding partner of the firm Arquitectonica in Miami. They did world-famous high-tech modernism and massive skyscrapers and stuff for a while, but then the two of them broke away to focus on urbanism, and specifically on bringing dense, walkable, mixed-use, human-scaled urbanism back to a country that had almost completely forgotten it, and it even made it illegal to build in many places. When they were called to Florida, to the Panhandle, to design Seaside, they arrived at a place that was almost completely given over to the automobile. The sand dunes and the forests were being leveled for ugly concrete hotels and vast parking lots that had devastating impacts on everything from the sea turtle populations to hurricane resilience. From that tough patch of America, they summoned Gentle Seaside, one of the first walkable and ecologically sensible towns to grace America in a long time. In so doing, they launched a world-class career with more projects and more prizes than I have time to list. I won't even mention her influential writings. I'm not going to say a word about them, because there's a lot of them. I will never forget visiting Seaside with my kids and my nephews and watching them form a tiny but fearsome little gang. They claimed joyful autonomy as they armed themselves with popsicles and floaties and conquered Seaside's intimate and breathtakingly innovative network of little pedestrian pathways called career paths. How many new places in this country give so much pleasure and power to human beings, let alone little human beings who are not in the workforce or amassing credit card debt? Elizabeth did not achieve this and the dozens upon dozens of other world-class community design projects single-handedly. No, because that's not how she works. She gathers communities to design communities, building networks of social, cultural, economic, and political bridges before a single brick is laid in the making of the real bridges. That's why she is a wonderful teacher as well as a great architect. That is why she leaves communities better than they were when she found them, if they were there to be found at all before she arrived. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk.
Thank you, Nathan. Nathan just gave my talk, albeit much more charmingly. I'm going to be a little bit more serious, I'm afraid. All right. So thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this event this evening. It sounded very enticing, given the topic. And then I realized I was totally unprepared, really, to have this conversation. So I'm grateful to have thought about it. But the slides that I'm going to start with are intended really for a student audience, an audience that looks forward to having a beneficial impact on the built environment and the people and nature that it serves. And I hope to do that by looking at a period of time, not yet history, in which architects recognized conditions and problems needing critique and improvement and initiated change. That would be my lifetime. But like Nathan said, many were involved. This is, so what I'll be talking about a 30-year, time to change the slides, a 30-year moment in time, a period that many of your faculty experienced and participated in. And I hope it will give you insight into the power of our profession when it recognizes that that power is vested in collaborations and permeating shared benefit over individual eminence. So I'm not going to read everything on all of these slides. I'll let you read whatever you can, but I will be giving you a very quick trajectory through the many things that we can look back on that probably for most of you is not evident to you, especially the students. And this is what your faculty has lived through and why they give you the certain perspectives they do because of what happened in their professional career. That's invisible to you. And so this is just a kind of opening of that window for you. So most of us who had that trajectory, which was so beautifully described in the introductions of both John and myself by your faculty, started out as architects. Coming out of school, immediately diving into practice. Very often a residence is that first full building. And we, of course, because we graduated into a hopeless time, a time of recession, political upheaval in the 70s, we decanted to academia in the Sun Belt in search of employment. Interest rates were at 20%. There were no jobs for us. And very slowly that practice built up. It then went on to, I think, as many of us in the new urbanism, we began to think about what our buildings were part of, what we could not manage to do with a single building. And that interest started with books. This is a sales pitch for your library. Here are two of them. Of course, Leo Creer and Christopher Alexander were very important in those beginnings. And here is a project that Catholic University students did back in the 80s with Diru, who's here, Diru Tadani, which was the first modeling of the Seaside Code, which then allowed it to go to PA Awards. People got to know about it and in fact encouraged the developer to start building it. So Seaside was very important both in the urban design components that Nathan spoke about, but it was also opened the door in some ways to the practice of classical and traditional architecture beyond the one building at a time that patrons were supporting minimally even at that time. It was a practice which then produced a theory. It produced codes which started to be not just design guidelines for that place, but started to be translated into real zoning codes and urban policy. It enabled many of us to start examining both the historical theory of neighborhoods and how it might be brought into the present through the new urbanism. And it enabled a series of explorations and real placemaking that addressed various concerns that everybody was concerned about, which have already been described. Thank you, Nathan. So nearby in the 80s, we started working on Kentlands where things occurred like mixing uses, mixing incomes and housing, unheard of, children walking to school, and the live work, which was reintroduced. There's even a newspaper article from that period that said that maybe downtown Gaithersburg could learn something from Kentlands. And so these theories and practice moved into existing places, into places like the small town in Florida, which is downtown Stewart, one of our first downtown revival projects. And enabled a number of us to start talking about the kind of work that we were doing a decade out of school. And so the Congress for the New Urbanism was founded. There's a longer story of how it grew out of the Iwane principles, but a charter was signed with 27 principles, which just this year has had several addenda. That kind of gathering, networking, support among the various professionals, the diversity of professionals, enabled us then to gather large groups for responses to catastrophes. The first one was in South Florida after Hurricane Andrew in '92. That's a Habitat for Humanity community that grew out of that effort. One of the more recent ones was the Mississippi renewal after Katrina. And the effect of these continues in places of catastrophe. But there were other challenges still ahead, and one was really addressing sprawl. Sprawl repair by my partner, Galina Takcheva, provides a manual for that. And one of the first was Mashpee Commons in New England. And downtown Kendall is one that we worked on with many community members engaged in developing those ideas. Practice continued to go back into theory and practice, constantly interacting. The idea of the transect, the concept of the transect, emerged from the new urbanism and the discussions, conversations, and practical experience that people were having. combining natural and human ecology. That in turn influenced policy with the smart code, a template code, not unlike the T&D working out of the Seaside Code, produced the first city-wide form-based code. Now there are many, Miami, which enabled the remaking of places and even coincided with LEED ND, one of the organizations that were working in parallel with CNU, ICAA being another one. And these kinds of ideas are very important, I think, for carrying on the kind of what is the theory that's growing out of the practice? How do we apply it? How does it transmute? And so in South Florida, where we've been working on sea level rise as an impact to respond to in terms of climate change, we started looking for what were the tools, what were the theories that had been developed and the practice in the last decades in the Congress. And we came up with the fact that the transect provides a wonderful, a very effective way for dealing with the very localized impacts for adaptation. Martin Dreiling in California and I have often discussed how this applies also to fire-prone areas in terms of geographical specificity. So this is my last slide. I have often thought as a faculty, especially as a faculty member, that, well, haven't we figured it all out? The new urbanism has all these tools. We've written codes. We have a lot of rules of thumb, all these things to help you do the right thing. Wouldn't that be a drag for the next generation coming up? There's nothing to do, right? Do we just keep repeating what you've told us to do? No, you have problems of your own that you're going to be solving. The wicked problems, as I call them. And I've listed a few here that you might be thinking about already. The last one may be one that could be part of our conversation. What we do as architects and urban designers is we are thinking and designing for the long term. These are long-term investments, maybe even longer than most the investors will be involved with them or the people that inhabit these places. But they are meant to be here for a long time. But our context is often one of short-term thinking, short-term finance, and limitations in a sense like that, that we have to contend with. So I think one of your questions, potential questions, brought up this, but quote from the Charter for the New Urbanism, which I think is apt in times of difficulty and in times when we wish to address things outside of design. And the Charter was prescient in recognizing, asking us to recognize that physical solutions are not the only thing that we should be dealing with, but that economic stability and vitality and environmental health cannot be sustained without a coherent and supportive physical framework. And what we do is important for human benefit, and we need to keep our eyes on that as our goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And if you don't mind, let's extend another hand of applause to welcome John Torti up as I pull up his PowerPoint. You don't want the long one, John? You want the short one?
No, short one, please.
All right.
There we go.
Make sure that it's advancing and everything. Okay. Yeah, good to go.
I'm okay. You can hear me? Thank you very much. And thank you for the lead in, Liz. It's a wonderful piece. I'm here to talk about design for democracy. Don't, pardon, my patriotism. I think of designing for democracy as not only the physical framework, but also getting our hands dirty in the social and economic issues that surround the neighborhood and the people that we design with and for. I do believe that designing for democracy is a journey of complexity, contradiction, and paradox. The history of our country will tell you that very easily in the ups and the downs. I'm here today going to be talking about some of that history. Let me see if I get this right. No, wrong way. There we go. So let's start with an older document, older than the Charter for the New Urbanism. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. 56 people signed this document. 41 were slaveholders. A paradox. A continuing paradox. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. To me, in order to form a more perfect union means we keep trying to form a more perfect union. It was not perfect in 1776, and it was not perfect in 1789 when the Constitution was actually in operation. It is not perfect today, nor has it been perfect for all of my life, which has been 1/3 of the history of the United States since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Think about that. Tonight, I'm going to talk about three things: a project in the city, a project in the suburbs, and then some rules or principles by which Torti Gallas uses, or in which Torti Gallas uses to deal with urban design and architecture projects. All, I would have to say, coming from an important day in 1983, the Di Rutadani Andres Duani Day in the nursing auditorium, the old nursing auditorium, when John Torti had an epiphany that the new urbanism was a way to move forward, to move my career forward, because I understood, I got permission in my head to proceed with designing beautiful things in beautiful neighborhoods, very much like the neighborhood I grew up in, the North Bronx. So I continue. I was 25 years old the day I looked out of my office window. I was a graduate student at Catholic U and working full-time for the National Capital Planning Commission as a young novice urban designer. I was on the 8th floor of the office building adjacent to the White House, looking out the window, and this is what I saw. In the Bronx, we would simply say, I was scared shitless. I was frightened. And 2 days later, this is what 7 corridors in Washington, D.C. looked like. The nation's capital. These corridors were raised by a frustrated citizenry who thought they were on the edge of the new promised land. that Martin Luther King Jr. had talked about. And this frustration was the result of his assassination. This is what those neighborhoods looked like. These were essentially African American neighborhoods that were middle class and thriving. This is what they looked like for about 40 years, from the late 60s to the late 90s. The idea of the devastation was immense. The city, the citizens, and the staff of the city, the churches, and the nonprofit organizations in these neighborhoods kept the neighborhoods, the residential portions of these neighborhoods intact. The people kept their neighborhoods intact. It was only the commercial corridors that were essentially destroyed. It was very, very interesting. Coincident with the middle 60s, the time of change, the time of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, was the change in population from a majority white population in Washington to a majority black population. It was also the point at which the population in the city was at a zenith of 750,000 people, and from that time had reduced to less than 500,000 people, white flight. So if you didn't get the message so far, in my mind, designing for democracy is designing against racism. It is a very important piece. And when you put on top of that, as you'll see in my last slide, designing for equity and designing for the planet and sustainability, I think are the biggest challenges architects and urban designers have today. Wrong button. There we go. Part of the task of rebuilding is talking. Part of the task is trying to learn to be humble. Part of the task is listening to the people in the neighborhoods that know more about the neighborhood than you'll ever hope to know. Listening to their wisdom. Trying to find respect. Trying to learn to give respect. I would tell you that of all of the failures that Torti Gallas had, we never achieved the respect at that situation. The minute we started to work for and achieve the respect, great things happened. So this is a very human interaction. This is a very important interaction. If the physical environment is to move forward, it isn't happening without respect, in our experience. One of the things that the city did, and the 35 years, 40 years that went in between, were essentially helped and support, through the good parts of it. Let's just helped by 3 mayors. They were the good set of mayors from Washington, finally. The elected mayors of Washington, not the appointed mayors of Washington. This was all happening sort of simultaneously, so it's an important piece. And the Metro decided to add another line. It was in existence since the late 60s as well, but not in this neighborhood. The Green Line, the city decided to ask Metro to move several stations 5 blocks west to capture some of these neighborhoods that have been devastated. And that was an amazing move. The support of the neighborhoods over the years had been an amazing move. So for those of you who understand what a figure ground looks like, the 1968-1999 figure ground was the Columbia Heights neighborhood in Washington, D.C. for all of those years. 10 years later, 9 years later, it became a full neighborhood with mixed use, mixed race, mixed everything, a mixed age, and a viable place. A place where the densities have stayed, the building types have stayed the same in the neighborhood, the densities have increased, and the densities on the retail strip have definitely increased. And the activity of how the city lives and the neighborhood lives on a day-to-day basis is absolutely amazing. Harriet Trugoning, the planning director of that time, called Columbia Heights a good model for the next American neighborhood. And it has stayed strong for the last 20 years. It's been absolutely fantastic. Next project, a suburban project, all the way on the other side of the country. This is a suburban neighborhood that was occupied by very, very, very poor people in Tacoma, Washington. This neighborhood was originally the temporary housing for the ship workers who built the ship in the harbor, Tacoma Harbor, built the ships in Tacoma Harbor for World War II. These were plywood shacks. These were shacks that 20 years ago, you could literally walk across the living room floor and your foot could fall through the floor. This was one of the most amazing neighborhoods Tom and Murphy and I ever set foot in. The charrettes had simultaneous translations in 5 different languages. These were African Americans, African Hispanic people, Russians, Cambodians, Vietnamese people who had made the most wonderful neighborhood socially, spiritually, you could ever imagine. And the city, again, more charrettes. And the city, in its wisdom, had put the newest, bestest elementary school right in the middle of this neighborhood. So you say schools count? Yeah. I remember a very valued new urbanist, Doug Kelbaugh, who got up in Toronto and gave a one-line speech about making great cities. Doug said, and I quote, "If you want great cities, make great schools." Thank you very much, and sat down. And this was the case for that exactly. There's also a stream that goes through this neighborhood that used to have salmon. I'm an East Coaster. Used to have salmon swim up and spawn. And thanks to Mr. Tom Gallas, he led a campaign to have zero runoff in the new neighborhood. And we achieved that, or close to it. And guess what happened? Salmon are coming back. It's amazing. This is the neighborhood now. And there's the harbor that the ships used to build in. These are the homes that we designed for very low-income people. The city also allowed Habitat for Humanity to come here and market rate housing to be built in this neighborhood. When the market rate developer, I'm very proud of this, advertised at the Sunday paper for people to come and buy their houses and look at the models, guess where they all lined up? At the public housing office, because they wanted to buy one of these houses. I'm not too proud. Okay. Last piece. It talks about what Liz is talking about. We need to design the places where full life happens. And the confluence of that in today's world is a tremendous amount of pressure from climate change, a tremendous amount of pressure from sprawl and the de-citifying of cities, which in essence brings people apart, separates people. You make so much money, you live here. You make so much money, you live here. Your kids get so much for tuition, they go to school here. Your kids don't get tuition, they go to school here. We get in our car and go shopping there. We go to work downtown. So everything is separate. In a real city, everything is together. In the Bronx, everything was together. And we were poor. My dad was a New York City fireman. But we had 3 public means of transportation within 2 blocks of our walk-up apartment adjacent to the L. I mean, it was an amazing life. I digress, sorry. 5 important principles to remember as designers. Great public realm, mix of everything, buildings, typologies, people, sex, kids, age, incomes, color, religions. Mix whatever you can mix it. It gets better. Connections. Connecting neighborhood to neighborhood, neighborhood to the next neighborhood, to the city, back to the block, back to the house, back to the neighbor. Connecting neighbor to neighbor. An important part of what we do. Beyond or through the physical design. Equity. Unbelievable issue. A very difficult issue. Even more difficult in the last 2 months. Sustainability of people and the planet. I hate to say it, students, these are your jobs. Example, public realm needs to be a symbol of a center. Public realm is simple. It's a big fancy sounding word. Public realm is the space between the private buildings. It's the plaza at Princeton, Palmer Square. It's a street. It's the public. It's the public realm that needs to be designed for people, not for automobiles. This is taking back the sprawl. Another way of saying it is taking back the public realm from the automobile and bringing it back to the people. This is, anybody know where this is? This is one of Walt Disney's public realms. We go on vacation to see public realm. We should be able to go down the block to see public realm. A notion about urban design. It's pretty simple, urban design. You look at the good stuff and you try to find a place for it to rebuild it, to remake it. This is Piazza Navona, built 600 years ago. This is Santana Row in San Jose, built 10 years ago. It's the same space. It operates in the same way. So this is not rocket science. It's an act of will. It's an act of will by the designers to make sure this stuff happens. And those spaces operate at a big citywide level, and they operate at an intimate level when you want to go have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. Mixing, even styles. Every city deserves a Frank Gehry, only one. Mixing ages. Connections, from walking down the street to taking your bicycle to taking the Staten Island ferry to connect to other places in the most energy efficient way you can. Walking is the best. Understanding, mixing races, people, cultures, and then understanding that we in the United States would require the current day, I looked it up last night, 5.5 planets to support us if we inhabited the entire Earth. 5.5 planets. Think about it. Climate change and equity. It's the issue. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
There we go. Okay, all right.
Thank
So that was incredible. Thank you both for taking the charge to begin this conversation, and let's continue the conversation. Nathaniel and I might just ask a couple of questions, and then we're very happy to turn it over to questions from the audience. Just we're going to ask one question first. Jeff, you can just hold it, please. So Liz, you showed the item from the charter for new urbanism, and I think that was pretty well addressed so far by conversation, right? Which was, while the physical realm cannot, we can't look to the physical realm to solve problems. What the first statement in the charter says is that you can't have these things without a coherence in the urban form. So I think both of you have made that very clear. And John, certainly, and both of you emphasized the work to be done. And of course, as we know in the United States from the 5.5 globes, Earths that we need to sustain ourselves, suburban sprawl, which we know people are working on with retrofit and so forth, but that's the enormous question addressing us. And we have to search for a coherence somehow there. So for a School of Architecture, how do we begin to address, we have suburban retrofit kind of guides, but how do we continue the conversation, and what are the imperatives, say, in the near term that'll be long-term fixes in the suburban environment? John has his.
After you, Professor.
Well, in the way that you couched that question, it made me think of something that is going on right now, which is the many changes to zoning codes, which are allowing, and I'm not sure they're mandating yet, but opening the door to single-family housing becoming 4 or 6 units. And this is actually a flashpoint. Is this the end of single-family housing? One side of the table will say, and there was in fact an editorial in the New York Times on this topic by a very important person some years ago, saying, I'm here to save the suburbs. It's an interesting topic because it is often preempting local control. It's state laws often that are being changed. And this is something that when we started out talking or working on sprawl repair, we imagined that the single family house was sacrosanct. And Galina's book has, the last part of it is about changing the single family house. And when I first saw that, I said, no way, Galina, that's never going to happen. And in fact, that is in front of us now, and in some ways it's seen as a way of addressing some of the wicked problems. I'm still skeptical whether it can work for various reasons, but I'll stop at that.
Am I on? Okay. What was the question?
So the second part of the opening of the charter for new urbanism talks about the need for suburban, change in the suburban structure.
Okay.
So what are the priorities you would put for students of architecture at this moment?
Yeah. So, yeah, the densifying the suburbs, I think, is a very good start for sure. Our practice is very busy, or one of the studios in our practice is very busy breathing life or changing old failed malls into new mixed-use neighborhoods of some density. And that's happening because the owners need revenue, right? So the money moves the equation. What's not happening quick enough in single-family neighborhoods, in apartment neighborhoods, and in mall neighborhoods is connecting one use to another. The suburbs have built their skeleton around separation, and you try to find a way to connect or add on, these become very difficult moves because it's very territorial. So in my own mind, in the suburbs, is finding a way to connect. I mean, you go down any chicken highway, right? And you pull into chicken highway #1, let's call it Arby's. And then you're trying to get over to somebody else in the car wants to go to McDonald's. You have to go back to the highway down the road and then back in again. They don't even connect parking lot to parking lot. So connections is a big deal in changing and making suburbs more urban. I cannot stop talking without mentioning that you have to also find a way to begin to erase the walls of separation, of color separation and income separation. We live in a magical city, actually. Washington is one of the best places in terms of mixing color, at least. But the next frontier is economics, income is very, very difficult, and how to mix there. And you get that in the older pre-World War II cities, even in America. You do get that mix.
Part of the issue with automobile centered design is that there were I was working recently with a scholar on Los Angeles suburbs, and she pointed out that actually there were many suburbs in Los Angeles that were surprisingly diverse. But the people who lived there didn't even know it because they never saw each other.
You're talking about snobbery?
Yeah, probably. But my question for both of you, both of you in different ways, but with remarkably similar levels of effectiveness, began your careers or at a key moment early in your career, saw problems, saw crises, saw that your profession was broken, and that architects were a part of the problem rather than the solution when it came to strengthening and creating a more perfect union, you might say. But you didn't rail in the dark, you didn't get depressed, you didn't start a really bad band. You actually managed to build lucrative, successful careers fixing these problems. How did you get the machinery engaged? How did you convince developers this needed to happen? How did you convince city officials that reform was necessary? How did you turn the freighter according to the winds of your dreams?
The social scientists. The social scientists will give you a trajectory for making change. And first part of it, I'll just try to speak loudly, is the idea. Sometimes they call it the vision, but it's about having an idea. The second one is removing the impediments from realizing the idea. But the most important one is a completed example. Is something that people can look at and say, this is how it works. This is a good idea, or keep it and move it on.
Did you hear that? A completed example.
Amazing.
Yes. This one's on.
Yes,
Thank you.
I got it.
So
It's behind.
that's what Seaside represented, was something that people could kick the tires of and say, well, maybe we should take this back home. One of our early inner city projects was in Cleveland with a non-for-profit that came to the office and said, we want Seaside in our burned out neighborhood. And we told them it wasn't going to work. It wasn't the right thing. It was all the reasons. And they said, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. And it happened.
So you slur over the 19 nervous breakdowns it takes to go from here to there. So I will tell you that, I graduated. I was in practice in the Midwest with two really great designers that went nowhere. I started a nonprofit corporation and was of service to the Model Cities program. It went nowhere. I gave up. I put the ideology under the bed. I moved east to work and support my family. And I worked for a firm which was the forerunner of Torti Gallas Partners, called CHK. These were housing architects of service to the real estate development community. Torti Gallas, and I learned housing. I learned how to talk to a developer. But I was going crazy. I had put my career on hold for 15 years. I knew I wasn't doing it. I was just doing things, getting a paycheck. And then this is the God's honest truth. I've said this as many times as I could say it. In that nursing auditorium a block away with Deru and Andres and Deru's model, I met Andres and knew Deru, and, they talked to me about what the new urbanism was about, what they were trying to do with Seaside.
And the academic world had a lot to do with it at the time.
The academic world had a lot to do with the new urbanism today. But yes, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
A place in which you can study and experiment. And it's not just the latest, newest thing. It's not just innovation, which is, of course, one of the things the university values, but it's really about addressing issues and trying to understand how design can address them. Or maybe you find out it's policy, because I think the equity issue, you can do a lot for it. You can provide a place for it. But that's one of the issues that design's not going to solve. It can respond to it. This is where policy becomes important.
And I knew it in 5 minutes. I knew it. I said, holy smokes. They're talking about my neighborhood, St. Brendan's in the Bronx. I got that. You're right. I understood it. And please take this note. I proceeded and tried to play 2 steps above my ability. I adapted it. It was mine. And I knew it. And that was it. That was the end of I had a place to go.
So, John, since you mentioned sustainability and equity, and we've understood that sustainability is maybe net zero or getting people out of their cars or any number of things. Equity is a little bit more elusive, let's say. Can you add to that the components?
Infrastructure of opportunity. It's like you said, architecture can't solve these problems, but maybe we can set the stage.
Well, let me go back. We the people. And that means everybody you know, including yourself. Look in the mirror. Equity has to do with your own heart. Okay. Stop.
Of course it does. But that Seaside Code had 7 different housing types in it, which represented, to our naive, or perhaps it was pre-Reagan mortgage selling times. There's a word for the economic policy that took place then, which I'm forgetting. And we really did believe that small to large, close to the water, deeper inland would provide a diversity of housing and people. We found out very quickly it wasn't that easy.
Too popular. It wasn't enough.
Well, actually, popularity was one thing, and then there was starting a rental program, which made every house an investment, which, of course, made Seaside even more successful in the eyes of developers, which meant that people would replicate it. But the equity issue is very clear, could not be solved by design, even before all of that happened. And that it really is a much different kind of problem. Yes, and we should be keeping that in the forefront as one of our goals. Certainly, I think you present it beautifully in that way.
So should we open the door to to we the people? So I know you had a question. Yes, please, if you can approach the microphone that's standing there, that would be great. Thank you.
It's actually a
It's a good question.
comment that I was excited to hear about Kentlands. I want to say that my daughter and her family live there, and my grandson walks to school, Rachel Carson Elementary School. They're very successful.
And let's be clear that there were, it's not just a matter of design. There was a wonderful developer. There was a person who believed in the goals, in the goal of equity, of walking. In all these cases, these are rare people who take it on to be responsible for making it happen. Don't be shy.
While we're waiting for the next question, I'd like to answer Liz's question.
Oh, we do have another question.
Oh, go ahead, after you.
Oh, sorry.
I'll remember what I have to say.
Just want to say thank you guys so much for your for coming here and speaking tonight. It's just been fascinating to hear your perspectives on new urbanism and everything in that regard. I was wondering if you could speak maybe more on just the urbanization of DC. I'm really interested in like what was done in Columbia Heights, and more so how that process sort of happened to revitalize the neighborhood.
Who started it? Bob Moore. Bob Moore was a neighborhood activist who worked continuously for those 30, 40 years, getting the pastors and the neighborhood organizations and all of the complaining and the city and the planning department, the architects that were interested in volunteering to come and talk. And he was a single person that I could remember that was the catalyst for the continuation of things. And, you know, Washington's a great town, and it was because of the federal government, you know, supported those kinds of African-American neighborhoods, you know, through incomes. A lot of people work for the government. What really moved the needle, the big move, was the metro. All of a sudden, a subway stop made that vacant land very attractive to real estate developers. And the second thing that happened was the city ponied up the money to build the parking for the commercial center, the Target, and that building is like 400,000 square foot retail center. And it is an interesting factoid for those of you who are planners. In the suburbs, one plans 5 parking spaces per every 1,000 square feet of retail. In the city, we used to say 4 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet of retail. Since the city was paying for it, they reduced the requirement to 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. And guess what? Half of the garages are empty. It was twice as much as they needed, and the retail outperformed for many, many years all of the retail of similar flag heads in the suburbs. So the subway made the day, and the rest of it, the metro owned parcels because they built a metro, they built the tracks there, the city owned parcels, and they literally put the parcels out for bid. It was, and Torti Gallas and Partners, we make our career on winning these competitions. We're very good at it. In fact, there were 1, 2, 3, or 4 competitions in Columbia Heights. We swept the table.
So John, you just said I think two very important things, two important elements for that kind of rebuilding, revival, change, the kind that I think we need a lot of. And there's still many cities that suffer in ways that Washington has passed over or passed beyond, let's say. And the first thing you said was that one person initiated, that there was one person who believed, had a vision, believed and worked on it, was committed to it. And I think you will find that in many cities that have remade themselves. I think of the river in Providence, Rhode Island, where the CNU is going to meet later this year, and how one architect, and that was an architect named Warren, told the city, kept telling the city they should uncover the river. It had just made the river essentially into a sewer. And now it is a beautiful piece of the public realm with granite balustrades along it and walkways and pedestrian bridges. One architect was that initiator. And the second thing you said was public funding. And it's not, there's a lot of public funding in highways, right? This is about a public investment in the public realm that people walk on and use for daily destinations, like the metro here. Because it gives once that kind of investment goes in, and remember, they love to do highways, they're shovel ready. You know, a lot of people still love them. But that subway or remaking a street for 2 blocks is a kind of signal of long-term belief in a place, because infrastructure, generally speaking, is made to last longer than buildings. The plan is the most important thing. The infrastructure, the public investment is the second most important investment, and private buildings are the third. But it gives the private investors the confidence then to go in and say, the city just spent millions of dollars on 4 blocks of that street. They put sidewalks and trees in. And so now we're going to go do the buildings, because that stuff is going to last for 50 years. Our mortgage is only 30 years, or we have 10 years of depreciation, or whatever they're thinking about. So the individual and very specific small-scale public investment.
Don't think for a minute that contributions from all of you through your taxes aren't an important piece of this. Liz said it 6 times, public contributions, government support. In order to truly move the dial, subsidies are required. And the goal in my head and in my heart is that they are required to get things moving and to help people then help themselves once they get beyond a certain threshold. And that is a very significant part of our practice, that when we go back and we see and happen to meet people that were in the charrettes 10 years ago and want to invite you in for tea because they remember what you told them to pay attention. There's home ownership things available here, and they do, and they did, and they conquered. I mean, it's totally true. One more?
Yes.
The CNU was in Cincinnati, and we did a neighborhood in Cincinnati, and I went to visit Shirley Colbert, who we had worked with 20 years ago. And this, if it wasn't for racism, Shirley would have been the CEO of General Motors. This was a brilliant human being. And she caused the federal government, the state of Ohio, the city of Cincinnati to move her way and her neighborhood's way to get what she wanted, and she got it. It was amazing.
Do we have another question? Tian, please. AIAS pressure, no pressure on you two. President, sorry, no pressure on you two.
Little bit of a short guy, but my question is more on the precedent studies and the application of precedents into a specific region. Something I've been notoriously bad at is studying precedent and learning how to apply it without it being, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, corny or out of character for the specific place. So could you elaborate more on when you were talking about learning about what works within a city and learning about how do you apply that within a specific different city?
Louis Sauer. Louis Sauer is or was, I don't know if he's still alive or not, a great architect, housing architect from Philadelphia. And I remember hearing a talk by Louis saying, you fancy architects, you should save all of your zeitgeist designs for the rich who could throw it away, or rich enough to throw it away if they get tired of it. But for poor people, they want what the middle class has in that city. So when we go, we look at two things. We look at we listen to the aspirations of the neighborhood and try to calibrate. And then we try to find the historically strong, architecturally strong neighborhoods in that city and try to use those as precedent for our work. I mean, that's how we do it. If you look at our work in Turkey, it looks like Turkish architecture. If you look at our work in Dubai, it looks like conservative Islamic architecture. So we try to, if you look at our work on the West Coast, it looks more at home on the West Coast. So that we do try to look and learn from what is there.
But beware of the word appropriation, which is often an accusation that's leveled at architecture or design that references places in the way that John is describing.
Oh, got another question. All right, Vince. No, by all means.
My question is, the American dream, sort of like in the past 70 years, has been defined by, once you get out and your career has stabilized, you buy a home, big home with a yard, quiet place away from the bustle of the city. How does new urbanism, like what are the ways that becomes integrated into the idea of what the American dream is? And how do you shift that sort of lifestyle change? Like we understand the benefits of new urbanism, but like a typical family or person in America might see a suburban house away from everything and say, that's what I want, even though it might be detrimental.
First of all, I think we would say that's an important part of the diversity. And then we might consider what the balance or disbalance of that is. And there are many people who are there because, who live in places because that was the cheapest way to have a house. For a long time, cities were inhospitable to families. Even at the beginning of our work in Richard Florida's advice for young people to move to cities in the creative class meant that everything that was being built was not for families, it was for individuals. So I think it's a matter of not demonizing any aspect of what we've made as much as saying, how do we balance it so that it represents the needs of the people? Right now, there are many people living in suburban houses who would leave if they could economically, for economic reasons. So, there are many issues. attached to that.
Where could I begin? You know, I guess I lived in one of those cities that were inhospitable. I'm older, so. And my parents moved, you know, out of the Bronx to Crestwood. It was a charming little neighborhood that looked like Hyattsville, right? Which is a wonderful neighborhood. Of course it is. But part of the dream was you know, so many things happen simultaneously. You know, we came out victors in World War II. We were a superpower. We offered a GI Bill, so every GI could go to college free. We offered the same GI a loan to buy a house without a down payment at a very low interest rate. We made a National Defense Highway Act. We built highways in the guise of making the United States more defensible, which were essentially the highways to the suburbs. And we grew two big industries. We grew an automobile industry and a home building industry. So the United States prospered. And oh, by the way, the women who worked in the factories while the men were fighting the war went back to the kitchen to gave up their jobs to the men who needed jobs when they came back. So it was a very intertwined situation. And it wasn't until 20 years later, 30 years later, that women finally came to the marketplace. And guess what happened? The economy of the United States doubled. Ooh, that was interesting. So back to the suburbs. So everybody has their castle in the suburbs. And we built the suburbs not the way we built neighborhoods prior to World War II. If you look at the United States, the little pamphlet up there, suburbs that you showed, it's a wonderful, you know, little anthology on beautiful, mostly commuter suburbs. And now it's Paradise planned at 25 pounds.
But I'd like to follow up on that in one way, which is that was a pretty easy, facile answer on my part. But I do think there is one area, and we might call them the exurbs, that do need to be addressed because of climate issues. And in the past year, we've seen massive destruction of the very low density building in the hills of Los Angeles or in the mountains of North Carolina. Two very different things, fire and flood. And those are places that no one's taking care of the natural environment, which is now under duress in a way that it wasn't before. So either the people who want to live in that and under those conditions need to be given that responsibility because government's not going to do it. Or we're going to say we shouldn't be there. So there are whole areas, parts of Europe where the government has had no problem saying we shouldn't be somewhere, but we haven't been able to say that because of democracy, I suppose. And so we really need to address them. Who's going to rebuild those roads in North Carolina that were built over many decades, maybe even more than decades, where people live very sparsely and the roads are completely washed away? In terms of the financial aspects of that, how do we justify that we're going to rebuild those roads at millions of dollars for a few hundred people or whatever it is? So nobody's talking about that yet in any way that I have perceived, but it was interesting to me that that was two very different impacts in very similar conditions. that really can be, I think, at this point, because of the degree of, if anybody ever put the dollar figures out of what it's going to take to recover those places. And we need to start that conversation.
Welcome to your careers. You just heard it. I mean, climate change is the strangest enigma in the world. No one wants to hear it, yet it's coming.
And most of what we've been hearing about it has been in terms of what everyone can do together, which is mitigating the emissions or mitigating the causes. We, as people involved with the built environment, are best suited to address the challenges of the kind of very specific local and regional adaptations that are going to be needed. Whether it's retreat might be one of those, which I was suggesting in some areas. In the course I teach on adaptation, the sequence is defense, accommodation, retreat, and don't forget cleanup, as we're finding out in Los Angeles. There's a lot of toxic material there. Who's going to pay for that and how? But in our world, retreat has become redevelopment, because the capital that can be raised at the beginning of a project means that you can rebuild for more fireproof buildings or more flood-proof buildings. So yes, welcome to your world.
Well, the insurance companies are going to have a very large say, or already having a large say in whether we rebuild or not. But
They are already in retreat, in fact.
yes, in some places. But I think, to put it more in context of this audience, the challenges of your careers are going to center around these changes, and our ability to adapt our settlements, our architecture, and our way of life to the way the planet changes. Nobody's asking us whether this change was going to happen or not. Do you want it or not? No, it's happening. It's a fact. Now, whether you believe it today or tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, it's on the way. It's coming. So the smarter of you, I believe, will embrace this and lead a way to adapt the way cities work, neighborhoods work, people live, people interact. The way of the physical, what are the words? The physical framework to allow full life to happen. And it's not what your ancestor did. It will be different.
We're almost out of time, and I don't just mean globally. I mean tonight. Yeah. But unless there's a last question from a student, I was going to wrap up with one more question that hits upon these things and maybe has a germ of optimism in it, because you need hope in order to confront these things, right? And you guys, your careers, your work is a source of great hope for me. And so to what you were saying, Vince, about the American dream being associated with a single family house, you guys were referring to these earlier suburbs, like the streetcar suburbs, which were single family houses with gardens, but they were much denser. They were tied to public transportation systems. You could walk to school, you could walk to a shop. That was the dream originally, and then it was the automobile industry and other companies that diffused it and tied it to Corbusian zoning. And the dreams can be nurtured. And architects have played a huge role in nurturing people's dreams and alerting them to the possible, and in inspiring them with opportunities they didn't even know they had. Like when Cleveland said to you, "We didn't know what was possible till we saw Seaside," and then they actually had to tell you what was possible in Cleveland. So how do architects become the mothers and fathers of human dreams? Because that's part of what you guys have done.
Well, I would say the first thing is to actually become an architect. The complexity of putting a building together is is unknown to many people outside of our profession. They have no idea what it takes to put a building together or a place together, most of the population. So you're embarking on an incredible training, not only here, but in the profession, those first years of getting buildings out the door with working drawings. I have no idea what AI is going to do to help you with that. But I often think about how that was our beginning. And at some point, you know, there was the trajectory shifted to something even more complex. But I interact with scientists on the topic of climate at the university. And what I've noticed as they shift their attention from trying to convince us that it's happening and how is it happening, what are the causes, to what are we going to do about it, understanding that in some cases we have to do something now in adaptation before any kind of mitigation can have any kind of mollifying effect. And they start talking about complex systems, and they draw these incredible diagrams, you know, with 9 or 10 circles around a center, and each one of them is something different that needs to be taken care of. And, you know, politics is one of them, government's another, social systems, finance, you name it. The whole shebang is there. And I look at those things and they're just struggling with these complex systems. And I say, that's what we do every day. That's what we learn to do as architects. So I would encourage you to take your training through to get that license, because that's what's going to give you the confidence that you can address complex problems, because you'll be doing it every day.
Yes, and
And
I have my own. Yes, and Susan Reddick was on a jury with me, very accomplished architect here in town. And we were trying to find the winner for this competition. And, you know, well, this is a good building. This is really hard to do good buildings. And it's really, really, really hard to do a great building. That's the yes. After you learn that, or before or as you learn that, you have to learn how to see. You have to learn to see what's around you, to see the precedent, as someone asked, to see the block, to see the life happening in the block, to understand how neighborhoods work. And to paraphrase Christopher Alexander, after you learn how to put a building together and you have a site that your new design is going to go on, you have to understand that site and understand it for its strength and its contribution to the neighborhood as it sits before you got there. And to make sure that after you leave, it's better than it was when you found it. I mean, it is an amazing failure of architects. Look at what's around you. Where's the beauty? Why do we have chicken highways? Why do we have ugly suburbs? Those architects were part of all of that somehow. We have a lot of work to do, and it's not getting any easier. but you are going to be equipped to solve the big problems. Do not give up. Thank you.
We're so grateful that John and Liz joined us this evening. So thank you all for coming and asking wonderful questions. We have more time for informal conversation in Miller for a reception. So just out the way, reminder that if you have not signed up for your AIA credits, please see Katie at a table outside on the way out. Or right here, right here. You can come right here with Katie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, Liz.
I'm sorry I couldn't make it any prettier.